only thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thanks for joining us. It's Thursday, which means it's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. That's our chance to talk about the foundations upon which the nation was built. Give us a chance to dive into questions on the Constitution and the Declaration and just the different things that made our nation different. What is exceptionalism? What made America so successful in the first place? And David, sometimes we find that in the founding documents. Sometimes we find it in the philosophy of the founding fathers. But it's all about going back to what was it that made America so different. So I've really enjoyed these programs and learning a lot about some of these areas in our history, frankly, I'd never even heard of.
Yeah, and it's been real cool, too, because, you know, as you and I go through these things and questions get asked and we have to go back and look at them, it's been really good for us. But apparently, folks really like this. I mean, this is a really, on Foundation of Freedom Thursday, we really have an active audience. We have an active audience anyway, but especially in these days. And the listenership just, it really goes through the roof on these Thursdays. So it's really cool that people are enjoying going back and seeing how all of these old principles relate to things that are going on today, that there really is nothing new under the sun, and that because of the prolific writing nature of our founding fathers, we do have recorded so many of their views on issues that we still face today.
Well, thankfully, you've got that library as well with 100,000 documents, so we can actually go to the original source and not have to listen to just what some professor says that they said or some modern book where they, cherry pick so much of the resources. So that library is definitely a blessing to be able to do that. The other cool thing we get to do is take questions from our audience and cover some of those issues and find out what's on their mind and what they're interested in today. So let's jump into some of the questions from our audience. So first question we're going to get to today is from Martha. She says, "I've been listening to Good News Friday and was not surprised by the number of public school teachers who do not have their children in public school." So these are teachers in the public school that choose not to send their own kids to public school. She goes on to say, "I'd be interested to see what that number is for those politicians who advocate public school and have children, and for politicians who have children." So if a politician is pushing for public schools and they have children, are their kids in public school? She goes on to say, "I, like many parents, have pulled my child out of public school just as my sister has. I continue to pray for you and your family, your ministry, and those who work for you. I was excited to hear she had heard you might be running for the U.S. Senate. You remember when that was Glenn Beck was really pushing you hard to do that. That was awfully close. It just dashed me and my husband when you decided the Lord hadn't led you that way. But the Lord knows best. Keep up the good work in Christ, Martha." Okay, David, look, we see this all the time. There's people out there that just advocate for the public schools, and they look down on you if you choose private school or homeschooling or whatever. And then you find out they're in public office, and their kids aren't in public schools. How often do you see that?
Well, there's two groups here she mentioned. She said, "I wasn't surprised by the number of public school teachers who don't send their kids." So let's just do a little review here. Number one, 11% of Americans do not send their kids to public schools. 11% of Americans enroll their kids in private schools, okay? So 89% of American kids attend public schools. Got it? All right. For public school teachers overall, 20% of public school teachers do not put their kids in public schools. So those who are closer to the schools have a twice of high rate as the average American of not putting their kids in school. But let me go down to some school districts here. Philadelphia, 44% of Philadelphia public school teachers enroll their kids in private schools. Cincinnati, 41% of public school teachers enroll their kids in private schools. Chicago, 39%. Rochester, New York, 38%. San Francisco, 34%. New York City, 33%, etc. So, interestingly, those who are closest to public schools, especially the larger public schools, don't want their kids there. That ought to say something for everybody else. Now, that's what she was talking about, and she said obviously that she'd pulled her kids out, and her sister has as well. But she said, I'd be curious to know what it is for folks in political realm. Well, let's go to Congress, because Congress spends a lot of bucks appropriating money in education. We spend about $480 billion a year, $500 billion a year on education. That's at the state, at the local, and at the federal level. And for U.S. senators, 44% of U.S. senators and 36% of representatives, kids in private school. So that's even higher than public school teachers. The guys who fund this stuff don't want their kids in it. 23% of House Education Labor Committee members, 40% of Senate Health Education. So the guys on the education committees, really high. Then when it comes down to Congressional Black Caucus, 35% of Congressional Black Caucus members send their kids to private schools. And you have 31% of Congressional Hispanic Caucus members, so minority groups don't want their kids in public schools if they're in Congress. Pretty good commentary on how poor the educational system is from those who are closest to it, either by teaching it or by funding it.
Man, that's I don't even have to add to that, bro. Just the stats, the facts themselves should speak volumes to people. Like you said, those are the ones that are closest to it. They see what's happening every day. And, man, 40% and even higher in some of those areas that they choose not to send their kids into those schools. We've got to take a quick break. We'll come back and get some more of your questions. Stay with us right here on WallBuilders Live.
John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. America has a history of great patriots who loved and sacrificed much for their country. One of these was John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. While president at Princeton, he personally trained many who became important leaders in American government, including James Madison. How could John Witherspoon tell if someone really loved America? He explained, "He is the best friend to American liberty, who is most sincere and active in promoting true and undefiled religion, and who sets himself with the greatest firmness to bear down profanity and immorality of every kind. Whoever is an avowed enemy of God, I hesitate not to call him an enemy to his country." Founding Father John Witherspoon believed that a true American patriot opposed profanity and immorality and promoted true and undefiled religion.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. That may be one of my favorite quotes now, David. I love the idea of binding them down with the chains of the Constitution. Okay, next question for today on Foundations of Freedom Thursday. And by the way, if you have questions, folks, please send them in to us, radio@wallbuilders.com. Is that easy? radio@wallbuilders.com. David, this one comes from New York. Mark says, on yesterday's Foundations of Freedom show, you touched on the First Amendment and its proper application. The government cannot restrict, but private entities could. I'm just wondering, though, can government force its opinion on its employees? For instance, same-sex marriage. I thought there were articles last summer in some of the things that they did last with Obamacare and with some of the decisions by the Supreme Court. Thought there were some of those last summer that, in effect, allow government to force its opinion on its employees. What do you say, David?
Well, the distinction we're making here is that the government can't stop your free speech, but that private entities can. Private entities can say, wait a minute, if you're going to work at this company, this is the position we take. Now, you don't have to be here. You can find a job somewhere else, but if you're going to work here. And so there are a lot of things that private companies can impose on their employees that public companies cannot, that the government cannot. Here working at WallBuilders, I can say, yeah, you want to work here, you need to be someone that adheres to biblical morality, because to work here, you have to sign an employee code, and that employee code says that I'm going to line my behavior up with biblical morality, that's sexual morality, that is lying, and etc., and we have the right to dismiss employees that don't conform to that. Now, government can't do that, but we can. So in that standpoint, when you look at the restrictions in the Bill of Rights, those restrictions to protect individual liberties are from government. But if you voluntarily say, well, I don't care about that liberty when I'm working for you. I have a right to free speech, but I'll give it up for the 8 hours a day that I'm working for you. That's fine. You make that agreement. And by the way, that's what the military does. The military cedes a number of its civil rights when it goes into the military. There are certain constitutional protections it does not get because we do separate the civilian from the military side, and that keeps the military from turning into something that counters the civilian side. So a lot of military folks, they all know this. They give up certain of their civil rights when they go in the military. They get them back when they come out. Now, that's the way it's supposed to work, but when you have an administration and you have an administration that disregards the law as blatantly as this one does, and that long before the Supreme Court made any ruling, it said, we totally think the court's wrong on the issue of marriage and homosexuality. And so here's the deal. And we have the memos that were sent out in various departments saying, if you don't affirm homosexuality, homosexual marriage, we're going to take that as you're opposing it and you're going to be in trouble. And so there is a lot of silencing that has gone on, should not have gone on, but there's a lot of stuff that should not have gone on that goes on. So when you ignore the Constitution as they have done, and folks like Ted Cruz, for 4 consecutive years, he's come out with the specific laws the administration itself says that it will not follow. When you have that lawless of an administration that it announces which federal laws it will and won't follow, then it's not surprising that it coerces its employees into believing what the administration wants or doesn't want. And as a public entity, that's not supposed to be the way it works. There's supposed to be the open, free market of opinion in so many areas. But that's not the tack that's been taken by this administration. So he's right. Same-sex marriage has been pushed very actively by the administration on its employees, and should not have been. But there is a difference between what the government and what private entities can do in restricting rights.
Quick break. We'll get some more questions when we come back. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. As Christians become more active in politics, they must remember to elevate principles above party loyalty. Perhaps the best illustration of this comes from the life of Founding Father Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence who served in the presidential administrations of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, each of whom was from a different political party. When Benjamin Rush was asked of his personal party affiliation, he responded, "I've been alternately called an aristocrat and a Democrat. I am neither. I am a Christocrat. I believe all power will fail of producing order and happiness in the hands of man. He alone who created and redeemed man is qualified to govern him." Like Benjamin Rush, we too must remain Christocrats regardless of our personal party affiliation.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday, taking your questions on some of those principles that made our country great and on questions of how some of those principles should be applied. In fact, our question today is about the one particular area, the First Amendment. We really haven't covered a whole lot here on WallBuilders Live. It comes from Alan in Florida. He said, "Please explain how the media is allowed to openly maintain so much bias. I know we have the freedom of the press, but are there any ethical standards required? I know that doctors and lawyers and CPAs and other professionals are required to maintain a level of ethical standards or they lose their license. Why are journalists not required to maintain a level of unbiased reporting? There are numerous studies to show their bias. Love your show. Keep up the great work. Thanks. Alan, great question. David, man, I've never even thought about that. Yeah. Talk about a profession that has a huge impact on the culture. The media is far more dangerous than any doctor.
Yeah, the problem we have with that is who becomes the one who determines what is bias and what is not bias. Now,
well, yeah, frankly, I don't think these other guys should be licensed by the state anyway. Let the market license
that's right.
them.
The market will take care of that. But let's say that the government erects a bureaucracy for making sure that news is unbiased.
Oh, that's scary.
That's scary. If they're the ones that are going to determine what's biased or not, particularly in this administration, then anything I believe is going to be biased because they are not on the side of traditional biblical values at all. So it's a very hard thing to do. Now, so since you don't want an external standard erected out there, because an external standard will be conformed to whatever that agency or group or monitoring service is, it takes an internal type of standard. This goes back to integrity. I like the word he used, ethics, although today ethics is seen as something very secular. In previous generations, ethics was tied to morality, which was tied to integrity, which was tied to religion. So what you find is the more secular an entity becomes, the less integrity it has, the less ethical it will be. And that is the problem with the media. The media is, along with professors, those are the two most secular entities in America. And I'll go back to Justice Joseph Story. Joseph Story put on the U.S. Supreme Court by James Madison. This is what he said. He said, to secure integrity, there must be a lofty sense of duty and a deep responsibility to future times as well as to God. Now, he's invoked the God word there with integrity. If you're going to have integrity, you have to realize you're accountable to God for what you do and say. And if you do that, then you make that conform because you'll answer to him if you don't. And so that's what creates integrity. Now, that's what we lack in the media today. A God consciousness? No. It's an anti-God consciousness. And by the way, a lofty sense of duty. Duty means doing what's right, even if it's hard, even if you don't want to. Well, there's not a sense of right and wrong because clearly the media has this moral equivalency, moral relativism stuff. Their beliefs are right, but everybody else's is wrong. As a matter of fact, we've seen in some of the media studies that up to 67% of media say that they feel like they have a, quote, moral responsibility to present their viewpoint to readers. So they're not into news. Now, if you go back to previous generations, you'll find in the founding era folks like Mary Catherine Goddard. Mary Catherine Goddard was the first female postmistress under the United Colonies once we separated from Great Britain. She printed the first Declaration of Independence in Baltimore. So she is a publisher. She's also a newspaper editor and publisher. And in her entire career, decades of printing newspapers and publishing newspapers, nobody ever figured out what her position was on anything because she clearly presented facts and presented both sides of arguments. And so after decades of publishing, nobody knew what she believed on any issue because she felt it was her responsibility as a journalist to present the facts, to get them out there. I also love reading old newspapers like the Congressional Globe. That was Washington, D.C., one of the two Washington, D.C. newspapers. And in it, they will go through and talk about the debates in Congress, talk about what congressman did what and who said what, and they'll go through it all, and then they come to a point that said, now, we're going to set aside the news for a bit and give you our opinion on it. We think Daniel Webster is a rascal, and they will just trash him, and then they'll come back and say, now, we're going back to the news. And so when they injected opinions in, they told you this is my opinion, which is what editorials used to be. But now nearly every news article becomes an editorial because we will choose the people to comment on the news story that align with what we believe, and anybody on the other side, we're going to make them look like doofuses. We're going to quote somebody from the Ku Klux Klan to show that this is what conservatives believe. So it's no longer trying to present both sides or trying to present facts. Every article becomes an editorial. The way you get around that is you have, as Joseph Story said, you have this lofty sense of duty, and in addition to that lofty sense of duty, you have this sense of accountability to future generations and to God. When that's lacking, you will have bias that clearly comes through, and it will be bias that reflects their beliefs that will not even attempt to present truth. So there is no good solution for this except self-regulation. Self-regulation is the only way you'll ever be able to handle that. And part of that self-regulation is don't buy their newspapers, don't buy their media. Go get on something like theblaze.com or some other source that will give you good news, that will present the news. And by the way, Blaze.com, they present a lot of news, and sometimes I even get frustrated because they present it so fairly that I wish they would show a bias. But that's the way that they are, and I appreciate that about them.
And they do it well. I mean, that's one thing. Like when you say, self-regulate. I mean, let the market decide. Even on this, right. We just got to stop, buying whatever's handed to us and start looking out there for better sources. And the Blaze you mentioned, it's a perfect example of where not only do you get the unbiased news and a better source, it's done better. I mean, I can scroll through the Blaze app or their website and quickly get the news for the whole day. Drudge Report. There's other resources that actually provide the product in a much better way for the market. Everybody's just kind of stuck with the old sources for too long. We got to be smarter than that and stop buying into the bias. Got to take a quick break. We'll get some more of your questions and more Foundations of Freedom here on our Foundations of Freedom Thursday here on WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "These people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty, and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. We're getting to questions that you've been sending in. If you'd like to send one in, send them to radio@wallbuilders.com. This one comes from Mary in California. She says she just listened to today's show, and her question has to do with what can we do each day to make the needed changes. She's talking about the program she just listened to was about our military people and chaplains. She's got several relatives that served in the military. She said we value our military and always have, so this is a real issue for us. Thanks for keeping us informed. And David, she was asking about just this religious bias that's now happening in our military and the attacks on people of faith and on Christianity, and what can we do about it?
We were going over in that program a section on the acts of religious hostility that are currently occurring in the Obama administration. There's an article we have on the website called America's Most Biblically Hostile President, in which we enumerate the things where this president specifically has gone after religious expressions, biblical hostility in a way that no other president has. And the military has been the target of that, and that has concerned a lot of folks. So what do we do about it? There's a few things. Number one, realize the military is willing to give their life to defend our rights. But as I mentioned in an earlier segment, they also give up political rights and constitutional rights to do that for the rest of us. They rely on folks like us going to defend their rights constitutionally and in the civil sphere. So the first thing we have to do is realize everyone has a mouthpiece today. Don't ever say, I can't do anything. No, you got Facebook, you got Twitter, you got friends, you got email chains, you got phone trees, you got Sunday school, you got something. and you talk to others and say, do you know what they're doing to our military? We can't let this happen. We have to defend our soldiers and sailors and airmen. So that's the first thing. You raise awareness. The second thing is you contact your legislators. You contact your congressman. Congressmen, I cannot tell you how many times that once they hear this is going on, they jump up because they want to defend these rights for our soldiers, but they don't read every news article that's out there, and a lot of the stuff they flat do not see. I was surprised recently being with 3 congressmen I know very well at how little they knew about what was in the news on the outside world because they're so focused on the issues they're having to deal with. So you call your congressman and say, Congressman, I can't believe what they're doing to our Navy chaplain. I can't believe they just took the Bible out of 2,400 Navy lodging rooms. You can't let that happen. Now, in this case, enough outcry was done that the Navy put those Bibles back into those 2,400. It's actually 24,000 rooms. But we have to stand up. We have to speak up. We have to speak out and contact our legislators. And if we do, we can defend these rights for those who are willing to give their lives to defend our rights.
Amen. No doubt about it, man. I mean, how little we're asked to do compared to what they do for us. So it's the least we can do to stand up in that way. Thanks for listening today, folks. You've been listening to Foundations of Freedom Thursday here on WallBuilders Live.
Samuel Adams said, "The liberties of our country and the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks."
We stand under